Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly complex and thoroughly unremarkable world of elephants. Those massive, gentle giants who spend their days perfecting the ancient art of walking very slowly toward water while making incredibly important decisions about which trees deserve their attention. While nature documentaries make them look majestic, the truth is, being an elephant is wonderfully, spectacularly ordinary. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Standing turns out to be the easy part. Walking without falling over like a drunk giraffe? That's graduate-level elephant studies. You spend your first week perfecting what can only be described as controlled stumbling, while your mother trails behind with the patient resignation of someone watching their teenager learn to drive. The mechanics of being large, you discover, are surprisingly complex. Your legs, which seemed perfectly reasonable when you were lying down, now reveal themselves to be elaborate engineering projects that no one bothered to beta test. Each step requires a careful negotiation between momentum, gravity, and your complete lack of experience with either. You lumber forward with the grace of a falling building, occasionally pausing to wonder if other baby elephants feel this much like a natural disaster waiting to happen. Your mother, bless her enormous heart, pretends not to notice when you veer dramatically to the left for no apparent reason, or when you come to a complete stop because a butterfly has landed on your trunk and you're not entirely sure what the protocol is for this situation. She maintains the sort of diplomatic silence usually reserved for dinner parties where someone's telling an embarrassing story about themselves. The herd moves with a rhythm you haven't quite caught on to yet, a slow, deliberate procession that somehow always knows where the good water is. You, meanwhile, are still figuring out that trees don't move when you walk into them and that your trunk isn't just decorative. The other elephants flow around obstacles with the fluid grace of water finding its way downhill, while you approach each acacia tree like it's a personal challenge to your navigation skills. There's something almost meditative about the way the herd moves, a collective decision-making process that happens without anyone appearing to make decisions. They simply begin walking in a particular direction, and somehow everyone knows this is the right direction, and somehow you're supposed to know it too. You don't, of course, but you follow anyway, because the alternative is standing alone in the savannah wondering what happened to everyone else. Your first attempts at keeping up with the group result in what can only be described as interpretive elephant dancing. You bound forward with excessive enthusiasm, overshoot your target by several elephant lengths, then spend an awkward moment trying to figure out how to slow down without simply falling over. The physics of deceleration, it turns out, are remarkably unintuitive when you weigh as much as a small car and have the coordination of a toddler in stilts. The landscape doesn't help. What looks like perfectly flat ground reveals itself to be full of subtle slopes, hidden rocks, and patches of earth with varying degrees of firmness. You learn to read terrain the way other creatures learn to read facial expressions through a series of increasingly embarrassing mistakes. That innocent-looking stretch of grass? It's actually a gentle slope that will have you picking up speed until you're basically skiing on your own feet. That firm-looking patch of earth? It's the consistency of chocolate pudding, and you'll sink into it up to your ankles while making a sound like a very large, very confused plunger. The other calves in the herd seem to have figured out the basics of locomotion while you're still workshopping your approach. They trot alongside their mothers with the casual competence of creatures who've never wondered whether their legs are supposed to move in a particular order. You watch them with the sort of professional interest usually reserved for studying foreign languages or complex machinery. Your mother, meanwhile, has developed what you'll later recognize as the 1,000-yard stare of elephant parents everywhere. She keeps one ear turned in your direction at all times, monitoring your progress with the sort of weary vigilance that suggests she's already calculating how many years of this she has ahead of her. When you stumble, she makes a small encouraging rumble. When you recover, she makes a small relieved rumble. When you immediately stumble again, she makes a small rumble that sounds suspiciously like elephant profanity. The art of being large, you're learning, extends beyond simply occupying space efficiently. It's about understanding that your presence affects the world around you in ways that smaller creatures don't have to consider. When you walk too close to a termite mound, your footsteps cause minor earthquakes in termite society. When you brush past a bush, you're essentially redesigning the local landscape. When you sneeze, small birds take flight in alarm, not because you're dangerous, but because you're loud and they weren't expecting it. But there are advantages to size, too. Predators that would be genuinely concerning to smaller creatures barely register as mild inconveniences to you. You're already large enough that most things would rather go around you than through you, which is reassuring in a world where being eaten is a legitimate career concern for many species. Even in your current state of ambulatory chaos, you're still intimidating enough that nothing smaller than a rhinoceros is likely to start trouble with you intentionally. The weather affects you differently too. Rain that would be a serious problem for smaller animals is just a pleasant shower for you. Wind that would knock over a gazelle barely ruffles your ears. The sun that sends other creatures scurrying for shade is merely a source of comfortable warmth across your broad back. You're built for this landscape in ways that become more apparent with each passing day, even if you haven't quite figured out how to move through it gracefully yet. By the end of your first week, you've achieved what might generously be called functional mobility. You can walk from point A to point B without falling down more than twice, and you've learned to compensate for your tendency to drift leftward by starting out slightly to the right. It's not elegant, but it's progress. And in the world of elephant development, progress is measured in very small, very patient increments. Speaking of trunks, yours is apparently broken. At least, that's the only explanation for why it keeps doing things you didn't ask it to do. While other elephants use theirs like sophisticated multi-tools, yours operates with all the precision of a garden hose in a windstorm. The trunk, you've been told, is one of evolution's masterpieces, a combination nose, hand, snorkel, and communication device all rolled into one flexible appendage. It contains, according to elephant folklore, 40,000 muscles, which sounds impressive until you realize that 39,000 of yours appear to be on permanent strike. The remaining 1,000 seem to be operating under the assumption that every task requires maximum effort and minimum accuracy. You watch your older cousin demonstrate the elegant art of trunk-to-mouth coordination, delicately selecting the choicest leaves while you're still trying to figure out how to drink water without drowning yourself. She moves her trunk with the precision of a master calligrapher, each gesture deliberate and economical. You move yours with the precision of someone operating heavy machinery while wearing oven mitts and a blindfold. The drinking situation is particularly embarrassing. Other elephants approach water sources with casual confidence, dipping their trunks in with the sort of practiced ease that suggests they've never had to think about it. They draw up the perfect amount of water, curl their trunks back toward their mouths, and deliver the water with the efficiency of a well-designed irrigation system. You approach water like you're attempting to perform surgery with a fire hose. Your first attempts at drinking result in what can only be described as aggressive water distribution. You suck up too much water, creating a trunk so heavy you can barely lift it. When you do manage to get it pointed toward your mouth, the water arrives with the force and accuracy of a broken sprinkler system. Most of it ends up on your forehead, in your ears, or decorating the general vicinity. The small amount that actually makes it into your mouth arrives as a surprise, causing you to snort and spray the remainder across the landscape like a malfunctioning fountain. Your mother watches these performances with the sort of carefully neutral expression that suggests she's trying very hard not to laugh. Other elephants in the herd have developed the diplomatic skill of pretending to be intensely interested in something else whenever you approach a water source, which is probably for the best. Eating presents its own challenges. The trunk, in theory, should be able to select specific leaves, strip them cleanly from branches, and deliver them to your mouth with the sort of precision that makes dining an elegant affair. Your trunk, in practice, approaches vegetation like it's trying to negotiate a hostile takeover. You grab entire branches when you meant to select individual leaves. You strip bark when you meant to gather fruit. You occasionally manage to wrap your trunk around nothing at all, and then spend several confused moments trying to eat air. The 40,000 muscles in your trunk seem to be organized into several competing factions, each with its own ideas about how things should be done. The faction controlling the tip appears to be run by perfectionists who insist on examining every single leaf before making a selection. The faction controlling the middle section operates under the philosophy that if some pressure is good, more pressure is better. The faction responsible for overall coordination seems to have abandoned its post entirely, leaving the other groups to sort things out among themselves. This leads to feeding sessions that look less like graceful foraging and more like performance art. You'll spend 5 minutes carefully selecting the perfect leaf, only to grab it with such enthusiasm that you pull down the entire branch. You'll gently grasp a piece of fruit, then squeeze it with enough force to turn it into juice before it reaches your mouth. You'll delicately position your trunk to collect grass, then swipe it sideways like you're trying to mow the entire savanna with a single gesture. The sensory aspects of trunk ownership are equally bewildering. Your trunk can detect scents with the sort of precision that makes bloodhounds look like amateurs, but interpreting those scents is like trying to read a foreign language while someone shines a flashlight in your eyes. Every breeze brings a symphony of smells: other elephants, various plants, distant water sources, the complex bouquet of decomposing vegetation, the sharp tang of predator markings. But sorting through them all feels like trying to have a conversation at a very loud, very crowded party where everyone's speaking different languages. Your trunk also serves as a primary means of social interaction, which would be more useful if you could control it reliably. Other elephants communicate through subtle trunk gestures, gentle touches, complex positioning, the equivalent of elephant body language. Your trunk communicates primarily through accident and enthusiasm. You mean to offer a gentle greeting touch, and instead deliver what amounts to a friendly assault. You attempt a subtle positioning, and end up looking like you're semaphoring for help. The good news is that other elephants seem to understand that trunk control is a learned skill, and they make allowances for your current level of incompetence. When you accidentally smack someone while trying to examine an interesting smell, they respond with patient tolerance rather than offense. When your attempts at delicate social interaction result in what looks like aggressive trunk wrestling, they simply step back and wait for you to sort yourself out. There are moments of genuine success that keep you motivated. Occasionally, everything works perfectly. You select exactly the leaf you intended, grasp it with precisely the right pressure, and deliver it to your mouth with something approaching elegance. These moments are rare enough to feel like minor miracles, but frequent enough to convince you that improvement is possible. The trunk also serves as a snorkel when you're wading through deeper water, though this requires a level of coordination you haven't achieved yet. In theory, you should be able to keep the tip above the waterline while submerging the rest of yourself for cooling or cleaning. In practice, you either forget to keep the tip up and end up snorting water, or you hold it so high that you look like a grey periscope with legs, defeating the entire purpose of trying to cool off. But gradually, imperceptibly, things improve. The muscles begin to remember certain movements. The coordination between different sections of your trunk starts to develop. You begin to understand the relationship between intention and execution, between the signal your brain sends and the action your trunk performs. It's still far from perfect, but it's progress. And progress in trunk mechanics is measured in very small, very patient increments, much like everything else in elephant life. The herd has rules, though no one bothered to give you the handbook. There's an invisible hierarchy that everyone seems to understand, except you, involving subtle ear positions, trunk gestures, and the complex social mathematics of who gets to drink first. Your grandmother watches your fumbling attempts at elephant etiquette with the sort of fond exasperation usually reserved for particularly slow houseplants. She's the kind of matriarch who's seen everything twice and has opinions about most of it, dispensed through meaningful looks and the occasional corrective shoulder bump. The social structure of elephant society, you're discovering, makes human politics look straightforward. Everyone has a position in the hierarchy, but that position shifts depending on context, season, individual relationships, and factors so subtle you're not sure they actually exist. Your mother ranks somewhere in the middle tier of the extended family group, which means you inherit a sort of provisional middle-tier status that comes with expectations you don't understand and responsibilities no one has explained to you. At the top of the social pyramid sits your grandmother, the undisputed matriarch who's been making decisions for this family group since before you were born and will probably continue making them long after you've figured out how to walk in a straight line. She doesn't assert her authority through dramatic displays or aggressive posturing. Instead, she simply exists with the sort of quiet confidence that makes other elephants automatically defer to her judgment. When she decides it's time to move, everyone moves. When she selects a resting spot, everyone settles around her. When she expresses an opinion about something through a particular ear position or a specific rumble, that opinion becomes group policy without discussion. Your attempts to understand this system result in a series of social faux pas that would be embarrassing if anyone expected better from you. You approach water sources in the wrong order, accidentally cutting in front of elephants who outrank you by decades of experience and wisdom. You position yourself incorrectly during rest periods, somehow managing to stand in spots that disrupt the careful social geometry the herd maintains. You respond to conversational rumbles with the sort of enthusiastic trumpeting usually reserved for emergencies, causing everyone to look around for whatever crisis you're announcing. The communication system alone requires years of study to master. Elephants communicate through a complex combination of audible calls, infrasonic rumbles you can feel rather than hear, subtle body positioning, and trunk gestures that carry meaning you're only beginning to suspect exists. Your mother makes a particular rumble that means stay close, but you keep confusing it with her rumble that means all clear, leading to moments where you wander off just as she was warning you to stay put. The infrasonic communication is particularly bewildering. These are sounds below the range of human hearing, but perfectly audible to elephant ears deep, thrumming communications that can travel for miles through the ground and air. The herd uses these low-frequency calls to coordinate movement, share information about resources, and maintain contact with other elephant groups across vast distances. You can feel these communications as vibrations in your chest and through your feet, but interpreting them is like trying to understand a language where every word sounds like distant thunder. Your grandmother's infrasonic vocabulary is particularly sophisticated. She can communicate complex information about water sources, weather patterns, human activity, and the general state of the world through rumbles so subtle that you're not even sure they're happening. Other elephants respond to these communications with immediate understanding, adjusting their behavior based on information you didn't even realize was being shared. The trunk gestures add another layer of complexity to social interaction. A trunk positioned over the back indicates relaxation and comfort. A trunk curled toward the chest suggests caution or uncertainty. A trunk extended toward another elephant can be a greeting, a threat, a request for attention, or an expression of affection, depending on the angle, the speed of approach, and about 17 other factors you haven't learned to recognize yet. Your attempts at trunk-based communication result in conversations that feel like trying to perform ballet while wearing scuba gear. You extend your trunk in what you think is a friendly greeting, only to realize you've accidentally challenged someone to a dominance display. You curl your trunk in what you believe is a relaxed position, only to discover you've somehow signaled that you're feeling ill and need assistance. You wave your trunk enthusiastically to express joy, only to find that you've indicated emergency-level distress and caused half the herd to come running. The feeding hierarchy adds yet another dimension to social navigation. Everyone eats, but not everyone eats at the same time or from the same sources. Your grandmother gets first choice of the choicest vegetation. Your mother and her sisters get second selection. You and the other calves get whatever remains, which is usually adequate, but requires you to understand when it's your turn and when you should wait patiently for others to finish. This system becomes more complex around water sources, where the social mathematics reach PhD-level difficulty. Not only does rank determine drinking order, but factors like pregnancy, health status, and recent social contributions all influence who gets priority access. You're supposed to understand these calculations instinctively, but instead you approach every water source like you're trying to solve a word problem in a foreign language. Your grandmother occasionally intervenes in your social education through what might be called gentle correction. When you position yourself inappropriately, she'll shift her own position in a way that guides you to the right spot without making a big production of your error. When you misinterpret a communication, she'll repeat it with slightly more emphasis until you figure out what you missed. When you commit a particularly egregious breach of elephant etiquette, she'll deliver a shoulder bump that's firm enough to get your attention, but gentle enough to avoid hurt feelings. The other calves in the herd provide both competition and education. They're learning the same social rules you are, but some of them seem to be picking it up faster than others. You watch them navigate conversations with their mothers, position themselves correctly during group movements, and respond appropriately to various social signals. They make it look easy, which is probably why your own fumbling feels so conspicuous. But there are also calves who seem even more confused than you are, which provides some comfort. There's your young cousin who keeps trying to nurse from elephants who aren't his mother, causing a series of gentle but firm rejections that suggest this is a common phase of calf development. There's another calf who responds to every social situation with the same enthusiastic trumpet, regardless of whether the situation calls for celebration, alarm, or quiet acknowledgement. Slowly, through observation and frequent correction, you begin to recognize patterns in the social fabric of the herd. You start to understand that your grandmother's slight ear movement means the group will be moving soon. You learn that your mother's particular rumble indicates approval, while a slightly different rumble suggests you should reconsider whatever you're doing. You begin to recognize the difference between a trunk gesture that invites interaction and one that politely requests personal space. The process is gradual and often frustrating, like learning to read a book where all the letters keep rearranging themselves. But gradually, the social world of the herd begins to make sense. You start to anticipate group movements, understand conversational cues, and navigate the complex hierarchy with something approaching competence. Most importantly, you begin to understand that everyone in the herd was once where you are now confused, clumsy, and trying to figure out how to be an elephant in a world that has very specific expectations about elephant behavior. The patience other elephants show toward your social mistakes isn't just tolerance, it's investment in your eventual contribution to the group's collective wisdom and success. The social education continues every day, with every interaction, every group decision, every moment of shared experience. You're not just learning how to behave appropriately in elephant society, you're learning to become part of something larger than yourself, a member of a community that has survived and thrived through cooperation, communication, and the patient teaching of each new generation. Between the lessons in locomotion, trunk mechanics, and social navigation, the savannah itself serves as your primary educational institution. Every day brings new curricula in the subtle arts of being an elephant in a world that's beautiful, dangerous, and endlessly instructive. The seasons provide the overarching structure for your education. The dry season teaches lessons in patience, resource conservation, and the importance of understanding landscape scale patterns. Water becomes precious, and learning to recognize the signs of reliable sources becomes a matter of survival. Your grandmother leads the family group to watering holes that seem to appear out of nowhere, following knowledge accumulated over decades of dry seasons. You begin to understand that the landscape holds information. The way certain trees grow indicates underground water. The behavior of other animals reveals the location of resources. The quality of soil tells stories about what will grow where. The wet season brings different lessons. Suddenly, water is everywhere, and the challenge shifts from finding it to managing abundance. The world turns green with startling speed, and food becomes so plentiful that learning to choose becomes more important than learning to find. Your education expands to include understanding seasonal rhythms, recognizing the signs that indicate when abundance is ending, and developing the ability to read long-term patterns in the landscape. The other species sharing your habitat provide constant instruction in the interconnectedness of the ecosystem. You learn to interpret the alarm calls of birds, understanding that their agitation often indicates predators or human activity in the area. You observe the behavior of antelope and buffalo, learning to read their body language for information about safety and resources. You begin to understand that you're part of a complex community of species, each with its own perspective on the shared landscape. Your education in elephant life extends beyond the immediate practical skills of eating, drinking, and not falling over. You're learning to think in terms of seasons and years, to understand that today's decisions affect tomorrow's options, and to recognize that survival depends not just on individual competence, but on the collective wisdom of the group. The landscape teaches patience in ways that no amount of direct instruction could accomplish. Everything in the savannah operates on timescales that dwarf human urgency. Trees grow slowly, seasons change gradually, and the most important lessons reveal themselves over months and years rather than minutes and hours. You're learning to think like the landscape itself in terms of patterns rather than events, relationships rather than individual actions, and long-term consequences rather than immediate results. As your first few months of elephant life draw to a close, you've made progress that would have seemed impossible when you first struggled to your feet on that Tuesday when everything began. You can walk without falling down most of the time. Your trunk occasionally does what you ask it to do. You understand at least some of the basic social protocols that keep the herd functioning smoothly. But more importantly, you've begun to understand that being an elephant isn't just about mastering a set of skills, it's about becoming part of something larger and more enduring than any individual elephant. You're learning to be a member of a family, a community, and an ecosystem that extends far beyond what you can see from where you're standing. The education continues every day, with every step, every interaction, every moment of shared experience with the herd. You're not just learning how to be an elephant, you're learning how to be this particular elephant, in this particular place, at this particular time in the long, slow story of elephant life on the African savanna. You're growing, though not in any particularly coordinated fashion. Your ears seem to have gotten the memo about being large, but your coordination is still processing the paperwork. You're at that delightful stage where you're too big to be completely helpless, but too small to be taken seriously, the teenager of the elephant world. The growth happens in spurts, like someone's periodically inflating you with a bicycle pump while you sleep. You wake up one morning to discover that your legs are longer than they were yesterday, but nobody bothered to inform your brain about this development. This leads to several days of walking like you're trying to step over invisible obstacles while your nervous system catches up with your new dimensions. Your ears are particularly enthusiastic about the growing process. They've decided to become magnificently large before the rest of you has figured out what to do with them. This means you spend a considerable amount of time accidentally hitting yourself in the face with your own ears when you turn your head too quickly. The other elephants pretend not to notice when you get into brief wrestling matches with your own anatomy, though you catch your mother making that particular rumble that sounds suspiciously like elephant laughter. The trunk situation has improved marginally, in that you now occasionally manage to eat things you actually intended to eat. However, your new size means the margin for error has increased proportionally. When you misjudge the distance to a branch, you don't just miss it, you demolish it entirely. When you grab a tuft of grass with too much enthusiasm, you end up with a trunk full of dirt and roots and the vague sense that you've somehow offended the landscape. Your growing body requires more food than your previous, more compact version, but your eating technique hasn't scaled up accordingly. You approach feeding with the same delicate precision you used when you were smaller, only to discover that what used to be adequate portions now leave you feeling like you've had a light snack. This leads to marathon feeding sessions where you systematically work your way through entire groves of trees, leaving behind a trail of stripped branches and confused vegetation. The dry season arrives like an unwelcome relative, overstaying its welcome and making everyone irritable. The herd begins the ancient ritual of the Great Migration, which sounds impressive until you realize it mostly involves walking very slowly in the direction of rumors about water. The migration, you discover, is less of a dramatic exodus and more of a very long, very patient camping trip with 30 of your closest relatives. The herd moves with the sort of deliberate pacing that makes glaciers look impulsive. Every decision requires consultation, discussion, and the kind of careful consideration usually reserved for international treaties or major life changes. Your grandmother leads these consultations with the sort of quiet authority that makes everyone else's opinions feel more like suggestions. She'll pause at a crossroads barely visible track diverging from another barely visible track and spend 20 minutes reading the landscape like she's consulting a detailed road atlas written in scents, soil moisture, and the positioning of distant mountains. The rest of the herd waits patiently while she makes these calculations, occasionally offering their own observations but generally trusting her expertise in the ancient art of knowing where water might be hiding. The landscape during migration reveals itself to be far more complex than you'd previously understood. What looked like empty savanna from your limited perspective turns out to be full of information, subtle variations in vegetation that indicate underground water sources, game trails that lead to seasonal feeding grounds, the remains of previous elephant visits that serve as waypoints in an invisible map passed down through generations. You've developed what can generously be called personality. Other elephants describe it as that phase young bulls go through, but you prefer to think of it as creative problem solving. Like the time you decided to investigate whether baobab trees taste different from the top. They don't, but the view is interesting, and your mother's expression when she found you up there was educational. The personality development manifests in ways that keep everyone around you perpetually alert. You've discovered that you have opinions about things, strong opinions about which path to take, which water source is acceptable, and which trees deserve your attention. These opinions don't always align with the collective wisdom of the herd, leading to what your grandmother diplomatically refers to as learning opportunities. Your investigation of the baobab tree represents a perfect example of your evolving approach to problem solving. The tree stood there, massive and ancient, its trunk swollen with stored water and its high branches laden with fruit that looked tantalizingly different from the vegetation available at ground level. The logical solution, from your perspective, was to find out what those high branches had to offer. The climbing process required considerable innovation. Baobab trees aren't designed for elephant access, their trunks are smooth and wide, offering no convenient handholds for creatures your size. But you've learned that determination can compensate for a lot of design limitations. Through a combination of momentum, optimism, and what can only be described as aggressive hugging, you managed to work your way up the trunk until you reached the lower branches. The fruit, as it turned out, tasted exactly like baobab fruit, regardless of altitude. This was mildly disappointing, but the view from 15 feet above the savannah was genuinely spectacular. You could see the herd spread out below you, other elephant families in the distance, and the vast sweep of the landscape extending to the horizon. For a few minutes, you felt like you discovered a new perspective on the world. The descent proved more challenging than the ascent. Getting down from a baobab tree, when you weigh several hundred pounds and have no natural climbing equipment, requires a different kind of problem solving than getting up one. Your eventual solution involved a series of controlled slides, strategic branch grabs, and a final leap that was more successful than graceful. Your mother's expression when she found you brushing bark fragments off your hide was a masterpiece of parental communication. Without making a sound, she managed to convey disappointment, relief, exasperation, and a kind of grudging admiration for your ingenuity. It was the look of someone who's simultaneously proud of your resourcefulness and worried about what you might try next. The other young elephants in the herd watch your adventures with varying degrees of interest and alarm. Some of them clearly think your approach to life is unnecessarily complicated. Why climb trees when there's perfectly good food at ground level? Others seem inspired by your example and have begun developing their own creative approaches to everyday challenges. Independence comes in small doses, like being allowed to wander 15 feet from the herd before someone trumpets you back into line. You use this freedom to discover that most of the savannah tastes roughly the same, but with subtle variations that will apparently matter to you later. The 15-foot radius represents a carefully negotiated compromise between your growing need for autonomy and the herd's collective nervous system. It's far enough to feel like genuine independence, but close enough that your mother can intervene before you get yourself into serious trouble. Within this boundary, you're free to explore, experiment, and make the sort of small mistakes that provide education without requiring rescue operations. Your taste-testing project becomes surprisingly comprehensive. The savannah, you discover, offers an extensive menu of vegetation, each with its own texture, flavor profile, and optimal harvesting technique. There's the sweet grass that grows in shallow depressions, where rainwater collects tender and mild, perfect for leisurely grazing. There's the bitter bark of certain acacia trees that clears your sinuses and makes your eyes water, but apparently provides essential minerals that your body craves. You learn to distinguish between the leaves that provide substantial nutrition and those that are essentially elephant junk food, pleasant to eat but not particularly sustaining. You discover that some plants taste better in the morning when they're still heavy with dew, while others improve throughout the day as the sun concentrates their flavors. It's a graduate-level course in elephant nutrition, taught through direct experience and frequent indigestion. The soil variations add another dimension to your education. Different areas have different mineral contents, and you learn to recognize the subtle taste differences that indicate which dirt is worth eating. Yes, elephants eat dirt. It's an essential source of minerals that vegetation alone can't provide. But not all dirt is created equal, and learning to identify high-quality soil becomes part of your expanding skill set. There are other young elephants in neighboring herds, and you've started what humans might call socializing, but which mostly involves bumping into each other and seeing who can make the most impressive mud puddle. These are important life skills, though you won't understand why for several more years. The inter-herd socializing happens during the migration, when multiple elephant families converge around the same water sources. These gatherings are like elephant conventions, opportunities for young elephants from different groups to meet, compare notes on growing up, and engage in the sort of casual competition that helps establish social skills and personal confidence. The mud puddle contests begin innocently enough. Someone discovers a particularly promising patch of mud, the right consistency, the right depth, positioned in a spot with good access and adequate drainage. What starts as simple wallowing quickly evolves into an artistic endeavor, with each participant trying to create the most impressive display of mud distribution. You've developed a signature technique that involves a running start, a dramatic belly flop, and a final flourish that sends mud flying in all directions. It's not subtle, but it's effective, and it usually results in a satisfying crater that others have to work hard to surpass. The other young elephants respond with their own innovations. Some favor precision over power, creating perfectly circular depressions with carefully sculpted edges. Others go for maximum chaos, turning the entire area into an abstract mud sculpture that defies easy description. These competitions serve multiple purposes beyond simple entertainment. They're opportunities to practice coordination, build confidence, and learn to read social situations. They're also ways of establishing your reputation among your peer group. Are you the innovative one, the competitive one, the one who always pushes things just a little too far? The landscape provides a steady curriculum in elephant survival. Which water sources are worth the walk? Which trees drop fruit when you shake them just right? And why lions always seem to show up right when you're having a particularly good dust bath? It's like a very slow, very large-scale nature documentary, except you're in it, and most of the exciting parts happen to someone else. Water source evaluation becomes a crucial skill as your independence radius expands. Not all water is equally desirable. Some sources are too alkaline, others are contaminated with runoff from upstream activities, and some are perfectly good, but located in areas that make them tactically inadvisable for young elephants traveling without full adult supervision. You learn to assess water quality through a combination of smell, taste, and observation of other animals. If the local bird population is thriving around a water source, it's probably safe for elephants. If other herbivores are avoiding it, despite apparent water scarcity, there's probably a reason worth investigating before you commit to drinking there. The tree-shaking discovery happens by accident, as most of your best discoveries do. You're investigating a promising-looking tree when you lean against it just a little too enthusiastically. The tree responds by dropping several pieces of fruit that you hadn't even noticed among the high branches. This leads to a systematic investigation of which trees respond well to strategic shaking and which ones require more subtle approaches. Some trees drop their fruit readily with just gentle encouragement. Others require more vigorous persuasion, leading to what looks like elephant breakdancing but is actually sophisticated agricultural technique. A few trees seem to hold onto their fruit out of pure stubbornness, requiring you to develop innovative approaches involving strategic positioning, careful timing, and occasionally recruiting assistance from other young elephants who've witnessed your technique and want to learn the method. The lion situation provides ongoing education in situational awareness and the importance of timing. Lions, you've learned, are less of a direct threat to elephants your size and more of a nuisance that requires appropriate management. They tend to appear at inconvenient moments, just when you've found the perfect dust bath spot, or when you're deeply engrossed in investigating an interesting smell, or when you've wandered just far enough from the herd to feel genuinely independent. The dust bath interruptions are particularly frustrating because good dust requires specific conditions, the right soil composition, adequate depth, proper drainage, and protection from wind. When you finally find the perfect spot and settle in for a thorough dust application, the appearance of lions feels like a cosmic joke designed to test your patience and your ability to prioritize safety over comfort. Elephants, you're learning, are not built for instant gratification. Everything takes time, eating takes time, walking takes time. Even deciding which direction to face can become a group discussion lasting several hours. You're developing the sort of patience that would make Buddhist monks jealous, though it's less spiritual enlightenment and more waiting for the good grass to grow back. The patience education begins with the most basic activities. Eating, which you'd assumed was a straightforward process of finding food and consuming it, turns out to involve extensive preparation, careful selection, thorough processing, and unhurried digestion. A single meal can take most of the day. not because you're particularly slow, but because doing it properly requires attention to detail that can't be rushed. You watch your grandmother approach feeding with the sort of methodical precision usually reserved for scientific research. She doesn't just grab the nearest vegetation, she samples, compares, considers seasonal factors, evaluates nutritional content, and makes selections based on criteria that take years to understand fully. A simple decision about which branch to strip can involve 5 minutes of careful examination, and watching this process teaches you that speed and efficiency aren't always the same thing. The group decision-making process provides advanced lessons in collective patience. When the herd needs to choose between two equally promising directions, the discussion doesn't follow human models of debate and quick consensus. Instead, it unfolds over hours of subtle communication, gradual position shifting, and the kind of slow convergence toward agreement that happens when everyone's opinion actually matters. You participate in these discussions as a junior member, offering your perspective through ear positions and trunk gestures while learning to read the complex negotiations happening around you. Your grandmother might suggest one direction through a barely perceptible shift in her stance. Your mother might counter with her own subtle indication of preference. Other family members contribute their own inputs through positioning, vocalization, and the elephant equivalent of body language. The process continues until consensus emerges not through anyone winning an argument, but through the group gradually recognizing which option feels right to everyone involved. It's democracy at geological speed, and learning to participate in it requires developing comfort with uncertainty, tolerance for extended deliberation, and faith that good decisions emerge from patient consideration rather than quick judgment. The seasonal rhythms reinforce these lessons in patience on a larger scale. The dry season teaches you that scarcity is temporary but requires careful management of resources and energy. You can't rush the return of the rains, but you can position yourself to take advantage of them when they arrive. The wet season teaches you that abundance is also temporary and should be enjoyed without waste, but also without the kind of frantic urgency that exhausts you before the good times are over. The wet season returns like a party everyone forgot they'd planned for, turning the world green and optimistic. Water appears in places you'd forgotten could hold water, and suddenly everyone's in a better mood. You celebrate by discovering that young elephant dancing looks a lot like controlled falling, but with more enthusiasm. The transformation that comes with the wet season feels like magic after months of careful resource management and patient waiting. The landscape explodes into green abundance almost overnight. Streams appear in drainage channels that were dust dry just days before. Trees that look dead suddenly sprout new leaves. Flowers bloom in impossible profusion, filling the air with scents that you'd almost forgotten existed. The herd's mood shifts dramatically with the changing conditions. The careful conservation of energy that characterized the dry season gives way to something approaching celebration. Everyone moves with more bounce in their step. Conversations become more frequent and animated. Even your grandmother seems younger, approaching the new abundance with the sort of enthusiasm usually reserved for special occasions. Your dancing discovery happens during one of these moments of seasonal euphoria. The combination of good weather, plentiful food, and the general celebratory atmosphere inspires you to express your joy through movement. What emerges is a form of expression that could generously be called interpretive elephant choreography, but which more accurately resembles enthusiastic stumbling with artistic intentions. The basic technique involves a series of controlled leaps, strategic weight shifts, and trunk movements that are part gesture and part balance aid. You launch yourself into the air with more optimism than coordination, land with the sort of impact that makes nearby birds reconsider their choice of roosting spots, and immediately transition into the next movement before you have time to lose your nerve. Other young elephants watch these performances with the sort of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters, impressed by the spectacle, slightly worried about the outcome, and eager to try their own variations. Soon you have a small group of juvenile elephants engaged in what can only be described as experimental dance, each contributing their own interpretation of how joy should be expressed through large mammal choreography. The adult elephants observe these artistic endeavors with the sort of patient tolerance that suggests they remember their own attempts at creative expression. They don't interfere unless someone appears to be in actual danger, but they maintain the kind of watchful presence that indicates they're prepared to intervene if enthusiasm overwhelms good judgment. Your juvenile years represent a crucial phase in your elephant education. You're old enough to understand complex concepts, but young enough to experiment with different approaches to life. Every day brings new lessons in the art of being an elephant, taught through experience, observation, and the patient guidance of your extended family. The landscape itself serves as your primary classroom, offering instruction in reading weather patterns, understanding seasonal cycles, and recognizing the subtle signs that indicate changes in your environment. You learn to interpret cloud formations, wind directions, and the behavior of other species as sources of information about what's coming next in your world. The social education expands beyond basic etiquette to include more sophisticated concepts of community cooperation, conflict resolution, and collective decision-making. You're learning to contribute to group discussions, offer assistance to other family members, and balance your individual needs with the requirements of herd life. Your physical development continues in fits and starts, with growth spurts that leave you temporarily uncoordinated, followed by periods of relative stability where you can practice your new capabilities. You're developing the kind of physical confidence that comes from understanding your own strength and limitations, learning to move through the world with appropriate caution and justified self-assurance. The patience you're developing extends beyond simply waiting for things to happen. You're learning to work toward long-term goals, to understand that some achievements require sustained effort over extended periods, and to find satisfaction in gradual progress rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Most importantly, you're beginning to understand your place in the larger story of elephant life. You're not just learning individual skills, you're learning to be part of a community that extends backward through generations of accumulated wisdom and forward through your own eventual contributions to that collective knowledge. The juvenile years are ending, but the education continues. Every experience adds to your understanding of what it means to be an elephant in this particular place at this particular time. You're growing into yourself, developing the confidence and competence that will carry you through the next phases of your thoroughly ordinary, completely essential elephant life. At 15, you're officially encouraged to explore other social opportunities. Elephants speak for, "It's time to leave home and figure out your own life." This sounds more dramatic than it actually is. You don't pack a trunk. Well, you bring your trunk, but you don't pack it. And there's no tearful goodbye scene. Your mother gives you the elephant equivalent of a firm handshake and some practical advice about avoiding humans. The transition from family life to bachelor existence happens with the sort of gentle inevitability that characterizes most major changes in elephant society. It's not so much a dramatic departure as a gradual shift in social gravity. You find yourself spending more time on the periphery of family gatherings, less involved in the daily decision-making processes that govern herd life, more interested in the activities of other young males you encounter during migrations and water source visits. Your mother handles the transition with the sort of practical acceptance that comes from having watched this process happen to previous generations. She doesn't make speeches about growing up or offer extensive advice about life management. Instead, she simply begins treating you more like a visiting relative than a permanent household member. When the family group settles for rest periods, she doesn't automatically save you a spot next to her. When feeding time comes, she doesn't wait to make sure you're getting adequate nutrition. When the herd moves, she doesn't check to see if you're keeping up. This isn't neglect, it's preparation. She's gradually reducing your dependence on family support systems while you're still close enough to receive help if you need it. It's elephant-style independence training, conducted with the sort of subtle expertise that makes the process feel natural rather than traumatic. The practical advice she offers is typically straightforward and focused on immediate survival concerns. Avoid areas with heavy human activity, especially during daylight hours. Don't challenge anything larger than yourself unless you're certain you can win. Water sources that smell wrong probably are wrong. When in doubt, retreat and reassess rather than charging forward with insufficient information. She also shares some wisdom about social navigation in the bachelor world. Other young males will test your confidence and your willingness to stand up for yourself. But most of these challenges are more about establishing pecking order than genuine aggression. Learn to distinguish between serious threats and social posturing. Don't take every challenge personally, but don't let anyone establish a pattern of pushing you around either. Bachelor herds, it turns out, are like college dormitories for elephants. A lot of posturing, occasional bursts of productivity, and an impressive ability to find trouble in the most unlikely places. Your new companions are a mixed group of males who've all been politely asked to pursue other interests by their respective families. The bachelor herd you eventually join consists of 7 young males ranging in age from 14 to 22, each at a different stage of figuring out how to be an independent elephant. The group dynamics shift constantly as members come and go, some returning periodically to check on family groups, others moving on to join different bachelor communities, and a few aging out into full adult independence and eventual territorial establishment. The social hierarchy in bachelor herds operates according to different principles than family group organization. Age matters, but so do size, confidence, and social skills. The oldest member isn't automatically the leader. That role tends to go to whoever demonstrates the best combination of good judgment, conflict resolution abilities, and general competence at keeping everyone alive and reasonably well fed. There's Jembe, who's convinced he's figured out the secret to perfect mud wallowing. He hasn't. And Tembo, whose approach to problem solving involves charging at things until they either move or prove unmovable. You fit right in, which says something about your life choices up to this point. Jembe's mud wallowing theories represent a perfect example of bachelor herd intellectual discourse. He's developed an elaborate philosophy about optimal mud consistency, strategic body positioning, and the importance of timing in relation to solar heating and wind patterns. His techniques are impressive to watch. He approaches mud wallowing with the sort of scientific precision usually reserved for complex engineering projects. The problem is that his results are indistinguishable from those achieved by elephants, who simply flop into mud without any theoretical framework whatsoever. This doesn't diminish his enthusiasm for explaining his methods or his confidence that he's discovered fundamental principles that others have overlooked. The rest of the bachelor herd listens to these explanations with the sort of polite attention usually reserved for elderly relatives telling familiar stories. Tembo represents the other end of the bachelor herd intellectual spectrum. His approach to problem solving is refreshingly direct. Identify obstacle, charge at obstacle, observe results, repeat as necessary. This method works surprisingly well for a wide range of challenges, from stubborn tree branches that won't drop their fruit to territorial disputes with other young males who need gentle reminders about personal space. The elegance of Tembo's approach lies in its simplicity. While other elephants spend time analyzing situations and developing complex strategies, Tembo has already implemented a solution and moved on to the next challenge. His success rate is actually quite high, partly because many problems really can be solved through straightforward application of force, and partly because his willingness to take direct action often surprises opponents who were expecting more elaborate negotiations. Your own approach to bachelor herd life combines elements of both theoretical understanding and practical application. You're interested in Jembe's analytical frameworks, but you also appreciate Tembo's results-oriented methodology. This makes you a useful mediator in group discussions and decision-making processes, able to translate between different problem-solving styles and help the group reach consensus on complex issues. The bachelor herd operates without the sort of formal leadership structure that governs family groups. Decisions emerge through discussion, experimentation, and gradual consensus rather than authoritative pronouncement. This democratic approach works well for a group of young males who are all learning to exercise independent judgment, but it can make simple decisions like, which direction should we walk today, take considerably longer than they would in other social contexts. The bachelor life comes with new responsibilities, like figuring out where you're supposed to sleep when no one's telling you where to stand. Territory, it turns out, is more of a suggestion than a rule when you're young and nobody takes you seriously yet. The concept of territory in elephant society is more nuanced than simple ownership. Adult males establish ranges that they defend from serious competitors, but these areas overlap and shift depending on seasonal conditions, resource availability, and the complex social negotiations that govern access to prime habitat. For young bachelors, territory is more about developing familiarity with particular areas than establishing exclusive claims to them. Your bachelor herd develops what might be called preferred routes through the landscape sequences of water sources, feeding areas, and resting spots that provide reliable resources and reasonable security. These routes shift with the seasons and adjust based on experience, but they give the group a sense of place and belonging in what would otherwise be an intimidatingly vast landscape. Learning to read territory involves understanding subtle signs that indicate how other elephants use particular areas. Rubbing trees marked with scent and showing wear patterns from repeated use signal popular gathering spots. Trail systems worn into the landscape by decades of elephant traffic reveal preferred routes between resources. Dung concentrations indicate areas where elephants spend extended time, suggesting either excellent resources or strategic value. You're learning the art of strategic posturing, how to look impressive without actually committing to anything too strenuous. Other young bulls practice their intimidating stances, while you've discovered that sometimes the best approach is to look like you're not paying attention until the drama sorts itself out. The posturing education begins with observing older males who've mastered the art of looking formidable without actually having to prove it through physical confrontation. The best practitioners can communicate strength, confidence, and mild threat through subtle adjustments in ear position, trunk carriage, and overall body language. They project an aura of competence that discourages challenges while avoiding the sort of aggressive displays that might escalate minor disputes into serious conflicts. Your own approach to posturing evolves through trial and error. Early attempts result in displays that are either insufficiently impressive or excessively dramatic. You spend a few weeks practicing an intimidating stance that looks more like you're auditioning for a role in elephant theatre than establishing your credentials as a formidable opponent. Other bachelor herd members offer constructive criticism, usually delivered through subtle mockery that helps you calibrate your performances. The strategic inattention technique proves surprisingly effective. While other young males engage in elaborate dominance displays, you develop the ability to appear completely absorbed in other activities, examining interesting vegetation, investigating unusual scents, or engaging in extended trunk maintenance routines. This approach often diffuses potential conflicts by removing yourself as a target for competitive energy while maintaining your dignity and avoiding the appearance of retreat. The technique works because it offers other elephants a face-saving way to abandon aggressive posturing without admitting defeat. They can simply redirect their attention to other matters, allowing everyone to return to normal social interaction without anyone losing status through explicit submission. It's conflict avoidance through strategic disengagement, and it becomes one of your signature social skills. That peculiar condition where male elephants become temporarily insufferable, is still a few years away, but you can see it affecting the older bulls. They walk around like they're auditioning for a role in an epic drama, while everyone else gives them a wide berth and waits for them to remember how to behave in public. Observing muth from a safe distance provides valuable education in hormone-driven behavior and social management. The condition affects male elephants periodically, causing dramatic increases in testosterone levels that result in aggressive behavior, territorial assertiveness, and general social disruption. Males in muth become unpredictable, intensely focused on dominance and mating opportunities, and largely uninterested in the sort of diplomatic solutions that normally govern elephant social interaction. The older bulls in your area demonstrate the full range of muth behavior. Some become aggressively territorial, challenging other males for access to prime resources, and establishing temporary dominance hierarchies through physical intimidation. Others focus their energy on searching for receptive females, traveling vast distances, and engaging in complex courtship behaviors that require enormous energy expenditure. The social dynamics around muth males reveal elephant society's sophisticated conflict management systems. Other elephants don't simply flee from muth males, they implement strategic avoidance protocols that allow everyone to coexist while minimizing potential conflicts. Bachelor herds adjust their routes and timing to avoid areas where muth males are active. Family groups modify their movement patterns to reduce unwanted encounters while still maintaining access to essential resources. The bachelor herd develops its own protocols for managing interactions with muth males. The basic strategy involves early detection, strategic retreat, and patient waiting for the condition to resolve. You learn to recognize the early signs of approaching muth changes in behavior, distinctive scent markers, and altered social interaction patterns that indicate a male is entering the heightened hormonal state. Independence means making your own mistakes, and you're approaching this responsibility with characteristic thoroughness. There was the incident with the electric fence, learning experience. The time you tried to intimidate a rhinoceros, educational. And your ongoing relationship with a particularly stubborn acacia tree, that drops the best seed pods just out of comfortable reach. The electric fence incident represents a perfect example of the sort of educational experience that bachelor life provides. The fence itself wasn't particularly impressive. A few strands of wire stretched between posts, designed to keep livestock contained rather than elephants excluded. It didn't look dangerous, and the bachelor herd had encountered similar barriers before without significant problems. Your approach to the fence investigation was methodical and scientific. You examined the posts, tested the tension of the wires, and assessed the overall construction quality. Everything suggested that this was just another minor obstacle that could be easily pushed aside or stepped over. The discovery that the wires carried electrical current came as a complete surprise, delivered through a shock that traveled from your trunk to your brain with the sort of clarity that makes certain lessons impossible to forget. The physical sensation was memorable, but the educational value extended beyond simple pain avoidance. The experience taught you that human technology can contain surprises that aren't apparent from visual inspection alone. It introduced the concept that barriers might have properties that require testing before full commitment. Most importantly, it demonstrated that confidence without adequate information can lead to unpleasant consequences. The bachelor herd's response to your electric fence encounter provided additional social education. Rather than mocking your mistake or offering unwanted sympathy, they treated it as a valuable data point that informed group strategy for future human infrastructure interactions. Your experience became part of the collective knowledge base, shared through casual conversation and referenced in later discussions about route planning and obstacle management. The rhinoceros intimidation attempt represents a different category of educational experience, one that revealed important information about threat assessment and the limits of strategic posturing. The rhinoceros in question was a solitary male, occupying a prime mud wallow that your bachelor herd had been hoping to access during the heat of the day. Your assessment of the situation led you to conclude that the rhinoceros could be encouraged to relocate through a display of elephant confidence and size advantage. This reasoning wasn't entirely wrong. Elephants are generally larger than rhinoceroses, and most conflicts between the species result in elephants maintaining or gaining access to disputed resources. However, your execution of the intimidation strategy failed to account for the rhinoceros's personality, current mood, and apparent willingness to engage in direct confrontation rather than diplomatic negotiation. Instead of withdrawing gracefully when faced with elephant displeasure, the rhinoceros responded with aggressive posturing of its own, followed by a charge that required you to implement an undignified but effective retreat strategy. The educational value of this encounter extended beyond simple lesson about rhinoceros behavior. You learned about the importance of reading individual temperament rather than relying on general species characteristics. You discovered that intimidation strategies require careful calibration to match the specific situation and opponent. Most importantly, you gained experience in rapid tactical reassessment and strategic withdrawal under pressure. The acacia tree relationship represents a different type of learning opportunity, one that requires sustained effort, creative problem solving, and patience with gradual progress. The tree stands in an area that your bachelor herd visits regularly, positioned along one of your preferred routes between water sources. It produces seed pods that are apparently delicious and nutritious, but it drops them according to its own schedule rather than elephant convenience. The challenge lies in the tree's architecture and the positioning of the most desirable seed pods. The tree's canopy spreads wide enough to provide excellent shade, but the best pods cluster in areas that are just beyond comfortable reach. The tree's trunk is too smooth for climbing, and its lower branches are too flexible to support elephant weight effectively. Your approach to this challenge has evolved through multiple seasons of experimentation. Early attempts focused on brute force solutions, shaking the tree vigorously in hopes of dislodging pods through mechanical agitation. This technique worked occasionally, but it also resulted in premature dropping of pods that weren't quite ready for consumption, reducing the overall efficiency of the harvest. Subsequent strategies involved more sophisticated approaches to pod collection. You developed techniques for selective branch manipulation, using your trunk to bend specific sections of the canopy while applying precise pressure to encourage pod release. You learned to read the subtle signs that indicate pod readiness, focusing your efforts on areas where intervention would be most productive. The ongoing nature of this challenge provides education in long-term project management and patient persistence. Unlike problems that can be solved through single, decisive actions, the acacia tree relationship requires sustained attention over multiple seasons. It teaches you to think in terms of gradual improvement rather than dramatic breakthrough, and to find satisfaction in incremental progress toward long-term goals. The bachelor herd operates on a loose schedule of eating, walking, and debating the merits of various water sources. It's surprisingly political. Everyone has opinions about everything, but no one's particularly invested in being right. It's like a very slow-moving parliament with better food and no dress code. The political aspects of bachelor herd life provide education in democratic decision-making and consensus building. Every significant choice, which direction to travel, which water source to visit, how long to rest in particular areas, becomes an opportunity for group discussion and collaborative problem-solving. These discussions reveal the complexity of apparently simple decisions and the value of incorporating multiple perspectives into planning processes. The water source debates exemplify the sophistication of bachelor herd political discourse. What looks like a straightforward choice between available options actually involves complex considerations of distance, water quality, security, social dynamics, and seasonal timing. Each member of the bachelor herd brings different priorities and experiences to these discussions, resulting in conversations that can extend over hours or even days. Gemby approaches water source evaluation from a technical perspective, analyzing factors like mineral content, temperature, and mud quality for post-drinking wallowing opportunities. Tembo favors efficiency and straightforward access, preferring sources that can be reached quickly and used without extensive preparation or complex route planning. Other members contribute their own criteria based on previous experiences, current health considerations, and personal preferences developed through years of bachelor herd life. Your own contribution to these political processes tends towards synthesis and mediation. You're developing skills in translating between different decision-making styles, helping the group identify common ground, and facilitating the sort of gradual consensus that allows everyone to feel heard while still reaching practical conclusions in reasonable timeframes. The bachelor herd experience provides education in adult male friendship that extends far beyond simple companionship. These relationships involve complex negotiations of personal space, resource sharing, mutual support during conflicts, and the sort of casual cooperation that makes survival more efficient and less stressful. Your friendship with Gemby develops around shared intellectual curiosity and complementary problem-solving approaches. While his theoretical frameworks for mud wallowing might be questionable, his general approach to understanding environmental systems proves valuable for group navigation and resource identification. You learn to appreciate his analytical perspective while offering practical applications for his observations. The friendship with Tembo emerges from mutual respect for different strengths and abilities. His direct action approach provides solutions to problems that might otherwise require extensive deliberation, while your mediation skills help him navigate situations that require more diplomatic finesse than straightforward charging. The partnership works because each of you recognizes the value of the other's approach without feeling competitive about personal methodology. These friendships operate according to different principles than family relationships. There's less obligation and more choice involved. You associate with these elephants because you enjoy their company and find their perspectives valuable, not because social structures require ongoing interaction. This voluntary aspect makes the relationships more satisfying in some ways, but it also requires more active maintenance and mutual consideration. The bachelor herd friendships also provide preparation for eventual adult social responsibilities. You're learning to balance individual needs with group welfare, to negotiate conflicts without damaging relationships, and to provide support during difficult periods while maintaining appropriate boundaries. These skills will become essential when you eventually establish your own territory and begin engaging with the broader adult elephant community. Your bachelor years coincide with several complete seasonal cycles, each offering different opportunities for learning and territory exploration. The dry seasons teach resource management and long-range planning, while wet seasons provide opportunities for experimentation and expansion of territorial knowledge. During dry seasons, the bachelor herd focuses on efficiency and reliability. Route planning becomes crucial as water sources become scarce, and feeding areas require longer travel times to access. The group develops expertise in reading landscape indicators that reveal hidden resources and learning to anticipate seasonal changes that affect resource availability. These dry season experiences teach you to think strategically about time and energy management. Every decision about where to go and how long to stay requires careful consideration of costs and benefits. You learn to balance immediate needs against future requirements, understanding that today's choices affect tomorrow's options in ways that require constant recalculation. Wet season exploration opens up possibilities for territorial expansion and experimentation with new routes and resource areas. With water abundant and food plentiful, the bachelor herd can afford to investigate areas that would be too risky during resource-scarce periods. These explorations expand your geographical knowledge and provide backup options for future seasons when primary routes might be unavailable. The seasonal rhythm also provides education in patience and long-term thinking. Changes in resource availability happen gradually, requiring constant attention to environmental indicators and willingness to adjust plans based on evolving conditions. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate seasonal transitions and to begin preparing for changes before they become urgent necessities. Your bachelor herd's travels bring regular encounters with other groups of young males, providing opportunities for social interaction, information exchange, and occasional competition. These encounters reveal the diversity of approaches to bachelor life and expose you to different strategies for managing independence and territorial development. Some bachelor groups operate with more formal hierarchies and structured decision-making processes. Others maintain looser associations that allow members greater individual autonomy. A few groups specialize in particular aspects of elephant life. Some focus on territorial mapping and resource identification. Others emphasize social networking and relationship building with family groups in their areas. The encounters also provide opportunities for individual relationships that extend beyond your immediate group membership. You develop casual friendships with elephants from other bachelor herds, maintaining these connections through periodic meetings during migrations and shared resource access periods. These extended social networks provide access to information about distant areas and alternative approaches to common challenges. Competition between bachelor groups tends to be subtle and focused on resource access rather than direct confrontation. When multiple groups converge on the same water source or feeding area, the interaction requires diplomatic negotiation and careful attention to social protocols. These situations provide education in intergroup politics and conflict resolution that extends beyond simple individual interactions. The bachelor years provide crucial opportunities for developing your personal identity as an independent elephant. Away from family structures that define your role and expectations, you're free to experiment with different approaches to common challenges and discover your own strengths and preferences. Your emerging identity combines elements inherited from family training with innovations developed through bachelor herd experience. The patience and diplomatic skills learned from your grandmother prove valuable in group mediation and conflict resolution. The analytical curiosity encouraged during your juvenile years evolves into sophisticated problem-solving abilities that benefit the entire bachelor herd. You're also developing preferences and specializations that distinguish you from other young males. Your particular expertise in tree fruit harvesting becomes recognized within the bachelor herd as a valuable skill set. Your mediation abilities make you a natural choice for handling disputes and facilitating group decisions. Your strategic approach to territorial exploration contributes to the group's expanding geographical knowledge. The identity development process involves not just discovering what you're good at, but also learning to accept limitations in areas where other elephants have superior skills. This acceptance allows for more effective cooperation and reduces the sort of competitive tensions that can disrupt group harmony. As your bachelor herd experience continues, you're gradually developing the skills and confidence needed for eventual full independence. The group provides a supportive environment for practicing adult responsibilities while still offering assistance when needed. This transitional period allows for gradual development of territorial knowledge, social skills, and practical competence needed for solitary elephant life. The preparation involves both practical skills development and psychological readiness for increased isolation and self-reliance. You're learning to make complex decisions without group consultation, to manage resources independently, and to navigate territorial negotiations with other adult males who won't offer the sort of tolerance extended to obviously young elephants. The bachelor herd experience also provides education in understanding your own readiness for independence. You're learning to recognize the difference between temporary challenges that require group support and situations that you can handle independently. This self-assessment ability becomes crucial for timing the eventual transition to full territorial establishment. As your coming-of-age period continues, the bachelor herd remains your primary social context, but you're gradually developing the sort of individual competence and confidence that will eventually allow you to establish your own place in the broader elephant community. The skills learned during these years, diplomatic negotiation, resource management, territorial knowledge, and social networking, will serve as the foundation for your eventual transition to full adult independence and territorial establishment. You've reached that stage of elephant life where you're no longer young enough to be excused for poor judgment, but not yet old enough to be considered wise. You're in your prime, though. Prime for an elephant involves a lot more standing around looking thoughtful than you'd expected. The transition into your prime years happens with the sort of gradual inevitability that characterizes most significant changes in elephant life. There's no ceremony marking the moment when you stop being a young bull and become a mature male. No dramatic revelation that suddenly makes you formidable. Instead, you wake up one morning and realize that other elephants have started treating you differently, with more respect, certainly, but also with more expectation that you'll behave like someone who knows what he's doing. Your tusks have grown into something respectable, and your shoulders have broadened to the point where smaller trees bend when you walk past them. This is useful for reaching high branches and less useful for navigating through dense forest, but you're adapting. The tusk development represents one of the most visible markers of your transition to maturity. What began as modest protrusions during your teenage years have evolved into substantial ivory implements that announce your status from considerable distances. They're not the massive tusks of truly ancient bulls, but they're respectable enough to command attention and serve practical functions beyond simple display. The tusks change more than just your appearance, they alter your relationship with the physical world. Reaching high branches becomes effortless, requiring nothing more than strategic positioning and minimal effort. Stripping bark from trees transforms from a wrestling match to a precision operation involving careful leverage and controlled pressure. Even simple tasks like scratching hard-to-reach spots become exercises in tool use rather than contortion. However, the impressive tusks also present new challenges. Dense forest navigation requires constant attention to tusk clearance, turning what were once straightforward walks into careful negotiations with vegetation. Low-hanging branches that you used to walk under now require ducking or route modification. Narrow passages between trees become geometric problems, requiring trigonometric solutions and occasional undignified backing-up maneuvers. Your shoulders have developed to match your tusks in terms of impressive bulk. The muscle mass required to support and manipulate substantial ivory has transformed your entire upper body architecture. You've acquired the sort of shoulders that make smaller elephants step aside automatically, not out of fear but out of practical recognition that you simply take up more space than you used to. The increased bulk brings authority, but also responsibility. When you approach water sources now, other elephants automatically adjust their positioning to accommodate your size. When you express interest in particular feeding areas, smaller bulls defer without discussion. When you participate in bachelor herd conversations, your opinions carry more weight than they did when you were still growing into your skin. The bachelor herd dynamics have shifted. You're no longer the newcomer figuring things out, there are younger bulls for that now. You've developed what might charitably be called leadership skills, though they mostly involve knowing which water holes dry up first and remembering where you left the good scratching trees. The leadership development happens through accumulated competence rather than dramatic promotion. Younger bulls in the bachelor herd begin asking your opinion about route planning, water source selection, and conflict resolution. They watch how you handle territorial negotiations with other elephants and adopt elements of your diplomatic style for their own use. Without anyone making formal announcements, you've become one of the elephants others look to for guidance. Your expertise areas have crystallized through years of experience and natural inclination. The waterhole knowledge represents perhaps your most valuable contribution to bachelor herd logistics. Through multiple seasonal cycles, You've developed an encyclopedic understanding of which sources remain reliable during dry periods, which ones require special timing to access safely, and which ones are worth long detours during migration periods. The scratching tree intelligence proves equally valuable, though in more immediate and practical ways. A good scratching tree can make the difference between comfort and misery during insect-heavy seasons, but the best trees aren't always obvious to inexperienced elephants. You've mapped the locations of premium scratching opportunities throughout your territorial range, cataloguing them by bark texture, positioning convenience, and seasonal accessibility. This practical knowledge base makes you indispensable to bachelor herd operations without requiring dramatic leadership displays or aggressive assertion of authority. Your influence operates through competence and reliability rather than intimidation, establishing a leadership style that emphasizes service over dominance. The younger bulls in current bachelor herd configurations remind you uncomfortably of your own early independence period. They approach challenges with the sort of enthusiastic inexperience that leads to educational encounters with electric fences and territorial disputes with rhinoceroses. Watching their learning process provides perspective on your own development and occasionally requires gentle intervention to prevent truly dangerous mistakes. Your mentoring approach tends toward indirect guidance rather than explicit instruction. When a young bull shows interest in investigating a potentially hazardous situation, you might casually position yourself to provide backup support. When group discussions veer toward obviously problematic decisions, you offer alternative suggestions without directly criticizing other proposals. When conflicts arise between group members, you facilitate resolution through strategic mediation rather than authoritative pronouncement. The years have taught you to read the landscape like a very slow, very large newspaper. The angle of the sun tells you when the rains are coming. The behavior of the dung beetles indicates soil moisture, and the way the wind carries scents reveals which direction holds the most promise for decent grazing. Your environmental literacy has developed to the point where the landscape communicates information as clearly as spoken language. The subtle changes in light quality that indicate approaching weather systems become apparent weeks before the actual arrival of seasonal shifts. The positioning of vegetation, the activity patterns of insects, and the behavior of other wildlife all contribute to an ongoing narrative about environmental conditions and future prospects. The dung beetle intelligence represents a particularly sophisticated example of ecological awareness. These industrious insects respond to soil moisture levels with precision that rivals expensive scientific instruments. When dung beetles begin modifying their behavior patterns, changing the depth of their tunneling, altering the timing of their surface activity, or shifting their geographic distribution, they're providing advance warning about underground conditions that will affect vegetation growth and water table levels. You've learned to interpret these insect signals alongside dozens of other environmental indicators. The flowering patterns of particular trees reveal information about rainfall timing and intensity from previous seasons. The migration timing of various bird species indicates resource availability across vast geographic ranges. The scent profiles carried by seasonal winds provide intelligence about conditions in areas hundreds of miles away. You've developed preferences not just for food, but for the quality of shade, the texture of mud for wallowing, and the social dynamics of different gathering spots. Some watering holes are for serious drinking, others are for socializing, and a few are strictly for the sort of contemplative solitude that comes with being a several-ton introvert. The preference development represents a refinement of environmental appreciation that comes with experience and the luxury of choice. When you were younger, any shade was good shade, any mud was adequate for wallowing, and any water source represented success in resource location. Now, with extensive territorial knowledge and reliable access to multiple options, you can afford to be selective about environmental quality. Shade preferences have evolved into sophisticated distinctions based on factors like cooling efficiency, wind exposure, insect activity levels, and proximity to other resources. The best shade combines temperature regulation with strategic positioning that allows for easy monitoring of surroundings while maintaining comfortable social distance from other elephants who might have different ideas about optimal resting procedures. The mud wallowing standards have become similarly refined. Texture preferences range from the fine, silky mud that provides thorough skin protection to the coarser, mineral-rich varieties that offer specific nutritional benefits. Temperature considerations include both immediate comfort and long-term skin protection effects. Location factors encompass accessibility, drainage characteristics, and the social implications of particular wallowing sites. Water source specialization reflects both practical considerations and social awareness. Some sources are optimal for rapid hydration during travel periods, offering easy access and good water quality without requiring extensive social negotiation. Others function as community gathering spots where the drinking is secondary to the social interaction opportunities. A few special locations provide the sort of peaceful solitude that allows for contemplative hydration without social obligations or territorial complications. The dry season has become less of a crisis and more of a challenging but manageable situation. You know which routes to take, which elephants to travel with, and how to pace yourself for the long walks between reliable resources. It's not excitement, but it's competence, and competence has its own satisfactions. The transformation of dry season experience from crisis management to strategic planning represents one of the most significant achievements of your maturation process. Early dry seasons felt like constant emergencies, with each resource decision carrying life or death implications, and every day bringing new challenges that required immediate solutions. Now, dry seasons unfold, according to anticipated patterns that allow for advanced planning and systematic resource management. You know which water sources will fail first, which ones will maintain flow longest, and which alternative routes provide backup options when primary sources become unavailable. This knowledge transforms potential crises into manageable challenges, requiring patience and systematic execution rather than desperate improvisation. The route planning has become increasingly sophisticated, incorporating factors like energy expenditure, optimization, social dynamics management, and strategic timing coordination. The best dry season routes balance distance efficiency with resource reliability, minimizing total energy costs while maintaining access to adequate nutrition and hydration opportunities. Travel companion selection adds another layer of strategic planning to dry season management. Some elephants excel at long-distance navigation, others contribute specialized knowledge about alternative water sources, and a few provide social stability that makes extended travel periods more psychologically sustainable. The art lies in assembling compatible groups that can function effectively under resource stress without developing the sort of interpersonal tensions that make difficult periods even more challenging. Living in the same landscape as humans requires a certain amount of tactical awareness. You've learned to recognize the sound of vehicles, the scent that means settlements are nearby, and the difference between curious humans with cameras and the kind you should avoid entirely. The human situation has evolved significantly during your lifetime, requiring constant adaptation and strategic thinking about coexistence possibilities. The landscape now includes permanent human settlements, regular vehicle traffic, and various forms of human infrastructure that present both obstacles and opportunities for elephant movement and resource access. Vehicle recognition has become an essential survival skill, involving audio discrimination abilities that allow identification of different vehicle types from considerable distances. Tourist vehicles produce distinct sound signatures that indicate observation rather than threat potential. Agricultural vehicles suggest human work activity that might require avoidance or careful timing. Government vehicles often herald official attention that could result in elephant relocation efforts or other management interventions. The scent detection capabilities extend beyond simple human presence to include distinctions between different types of human activity. Cooking fires indicate temporary human occupation that might be avoided through route timing. Agricultural activities produce chemical signatures that suggest crop areas requiring wide clearance. Industrial operations create distinctive odor profiles that signal areas best avoided entirely. Settlement proximity assessment involves integrating multiple information sources to evaluate threat levels and access opportunities. Some human communities have developed reasonable coexistence protocols that allow elephant transit through traditional corridor areas. Others maintain aggressive exclusion policies that require complete avoidance. Learning to distinguish between these different human management approaches prevents unnecessary conflicts while maintaining access to traditional territory. Most encounters are anticlimactic, a brief moment of mutual assessment, followed by everyone going about their business. The humans seem as interested in avoiding unnecessary drama as you are, which suggests they might be more sensible than their reputation indicates. The typical human-elephant encounter follows predictable patterns that suggest both species have developed effective protocols for minimizing conflict potential. Humans generally avoid approaching elephants directly, preferring to observe from distances that don't trigger defensive responses. Elephants reciprocate by avoiding human activity areas during peak occupation periods and maintaining respectful distances during unavoidable encounters. The mutual interest in drama avoidance reflects practical recognition that conflicts serve no one's interests effectively. Humans who provoke elephant aggression risk serious injury or property damage. Elephants who engage in confrontational behavior with humans often face management interventions that disrupt established territorial patterns and social relationships. The developing coexistence protocols suggest greater intelligence on both sides than historical human-elephant relationships might indicate. Humans have learned to predict elephant movement patterns and adjust their activities accordingly. Elephants have adapted their traditional routes and timing to accommodate human presence while maintaining access to essential resources. Other elephants from different herds provide social opportunities and the occasional territorial discussion. These conversations usually involve a lot of careful posturing, subtle threats, and eventual agreement that there's plenty of landscape for everyone. It's diplomacy at walking speed, which suits everyone involved. The inter-herd diplomatic encounters represent some of the most sophisticated social interactions in elephant society. These meetings require careful navigation of territorial sensitivities, resource competition, and social hierarchy considerations that can affect multiple family groups across extended periods. The posturing elements involve complex communications about strength, confidence, and territorial commitment without escalating to actual physical confrontation. Successful posturing communicates capability while leaving room for face-saving retreat options that allow all parties to maintain dignity regardless of the encounter outcome. The territorial discussions operate through gradual information exchange rather than explicit negotiation. Elephants share intelligence about resource availability, seasonal timing, and optimal access routes, while assessing each other's territorial knowledge and commitment levels. These conversations can extend over several days of parallel travel and casual interaction. The eventual agreements about landscape sharing reflect practical recognition that territorial exclusivity is neither achievable nor beneficial for anyone involved. The landscape provides adequate resources for multiple elephant groups when access is coordinated properly, and conflict is avoided through diplomatic cooperation rather than competitive confrontation. Your prime years bring increased responsibility for managing complex social interactions that extend beyond simple bachelor herd dynamics. You're now involved in broader elephant community networks that include family groups, other bachelor herds, and solitary bulls pursuing various territorial and social strategies. The family group interactions require delicate balance between maintaining respectful distance and preserving social connections that might become important for future cooperation. Female elephants with young calves maintain protective vigilance around unknown males, but experienced matriarchs often welcome information exchange with reliable bulls who can provide intelligence about distant resources and territorial conditions. Your reputation within the broader elephant community develops through accumulated encounters and consistent behavior patterns. Elephants remember individuals who provide accurate information, maintain diplomatic protocols, and contribute to community welfare through resource sharing and conflict de-escalation. This reputation becomes valuable social capital that facilitates future interactions and provides access to cooperative opportunities. The bachelor herd leadership responsibilities expand to include representing the group in inter-herd negotiations and community-wide decision-making processes. When multiple elephant groups converge around seasonal resources, someone needs to coordinate access timing, mediate territorial disputes, and facilitate information sharing that benefits everyone involved. The approaching possibility of muth adds new dimensions to your social and territorial planning. While the condition remains several years in the future, observing its effects on older bulls provides education in the behavioral changes and social management requirements that will eventually affect your own life patterns. Muth represents a fundamental shift in priorities and social functioning that requires advanced preparation and strategic thinking. bulls in muth abandon normal social cooperation in favor of competitive behavior focused on dominance, establishment, and mating opportunities. This behavioral change affects not just the individual in muth, but entire regional elephant communities. The preparation involves developing territorial knowledge and social relationships that can support muth behavior without creating unsustainable conflicts. You're learning to identify areas suitable for muth activity regions with adequate resources, appropriate social dynamics, and minimal human interference that could complicate the already challenging behavioral period. The social relationship management requires maintaining connections with other bulls who can provide support or strategic avoidance during muth periods. The bachelor herd networks serve as information sharing systems that help coordinate muth timing and territorial distribution to minimize competitive conflicts between community members. Your prime years require increased attention to physical maintenance and health management strategies that will sustain your capabilities through the demanding decades ahead. The impressive physical development that characterizes this life stage also brings new responsibilities for managing your body's complex requirements. Tusk maintenance becomes increasingly important as the ivory continues growing and requires regular use to prevent overgrowth problems. The daily activities of foraging, bark stripping, and territorial marking provide natural tusk conditioning, but optimal maintenance requires conscious attention to balanced use patterns that prevent uneven wear or structural problems. The expanded muscle mass demands more sophisticated nutrition management than your younger years required. Your body now requires not just adequate calories but balanced mineral intake, appropriate protein sources, and strategic timing of consumption to support the metabolic demands of maintaining several tons of functional muscle tissue. Exercise requirements include not just basic movement for transportation, but targeted activities that maintain strength, flexibility, and coordination across your entire physical system. The daily routines of elephant life provide substantial exercise, but optimal physical maintenance requires conscious attention to ensuring comprehensive conditioning across all movement patterns. Your growing confidence and capability enable expansion of territorial knowledge and development of new resource access opportunities that were beyond your capabilities during earlier life stages. The prime years represent optimal timing for ambitious exploration projects and long-term territorial investment strategies. The exploration projects involve systematic investigation of areas beyond your established territorial boundaries, assessing resource potential and access requirements for future use. Some areas prove immediately valuable and become incorporated into regular travel patterns. Others represent strategic reserves that might become important during unusual environmental conditions or seasonal variations. Resource development includes activities like trail maintenance, water source improvement, and vegetation management that enhance the long-term value of territorial areas. These investments require significant immediate effort, but provide benefits that extend over multiple seasons and potentially multiple decades. The territorial expansion also involves social negotiation with other elephants who have established interests in adjacent areas. These negotiations require diplomatic skills and strategic thinking about long-term relationship management, balancing immediate territorial gains against future cooperation opportunities. Your prime years represent peak intellectual development, combining accumulated experience with optimal cognitive function to produce sophisticated problem-solving capabilities that surpass both your younger and older life stages. The problem-solving mastery encompasses both routine challenge management and innovative responses to novel situations. Routine challenges become automated, requiring minimal conscious attention while producing optimal outcomes. Novel situations receive the benefit of extensive experience-based pattern recognition combined with creative thinking about alternative approaches. The intellectual development includes sophisticated environmental modeling capabilities that allow prediction of resource availability, weather patterns, and social dynamics across extended temporal and geographic scales. This predictive ability enables strategic planning that optimizes long-term outcomes rather than simply managing immediate requirements. As your prime years continue, you're gradually developing awareness of the next life stage approaching in the distance. The transition from prime adult to senior elephant will require different strategies and capabilities, and subtle preparation for that transition begins during the peak years. The preparation involves consolidating territorial knowledge, strengthening social relationships, and developing the sort of wisdom-based influence that characterizes successful elder elephants. The physical capabilities that define your current prime will eventually decline, requiring compensation through increased intellectual sophistication and social capital. Your prime years represent the peak of your physical and social capabilities, but they also serve as preparation for the decades of continued contribution that lie ahead. The skills developed now, diplomatic expertise, territorial knowledge, environmental literacy, and community leadership, will provide the foundation for your eventual transition to elder status and the different but equally important role that awaits in the continuing story of your thoroughly unremarkable, completely essential elephant life. You've become what younger elephants politely call established. This means other elephants ask your opinion about things, even when you don't particularly want to give it. Your judgment has improved with age, though this mostly means you've learned to recognize situations you should avoid entirely. The transition to established status happens without ceremony or official recognition, much like most significant changes in elephant life. One day you wake up and realize that conversations pause when you approach, that younger bulls defer to your water source selections, and that other elephants wait to see which direction you'll choose before making their own route decisions. It's a subtle shift in social gravity that places you at the center of group dynamics whether you asked for that position or not. The opinion-seeking phenomenon presents its own challenges. Younger elephants approach you with questions about everything from seasonal timing to territorial negotiations, apparently under the impression that age automatically confers wisdom about subjects you're still figuring out yourself. They want to know which water sources are most reliable, which human settlements pose the greatest threats, and how to handle complex social situations that you've managed to avoid through luck and strategic incompetence. Your responses to these consultations have evolved from elaborate explanations to increasingly concise observations. Early in your established period, you felt obligated to provide comprehensive guidance that demonstrated your worthiness of the respect being shown. Now you've learned that the most helpful advice often consists of sharing what you've learned to avoid rather than prescribing specific actions. Don't try to intimidate rhinoceroses. Turns out to be more valuable guidance than detailed strategic frameworks for territorial negotiation. The judgment improvement represents a genuine development in your decision-making capabilities, though the improvement manifests more through risk avoidance than dramatic insight. You've accumulated an extensive catalogue of situations that seem reasonable at first glance but inevitably lead to complications. Electric fences, territorial disputes with predators, and investigation of unusual human activities all fall into the category of experiences that seemed educational at the time, but which you now recommend avoiding entirely. The bachelor herd has evolved around you. Some of your old companions have moved on to their own territories. Others have settled into comfortable routines that intersect with yours. You've found yourself in the peculiar position of being someone others look to for guidance, which is mildly terrifying, given your track record with decision-making. The evolution of bachelor-herd relationships reflects the natural progression of elephant social development. Jembe eventually concluded that his mud-wallowing theories were ready for practical application in his own territorial establishment and departed to implement his vision of optimal wallowing site development. His farewell involved an elaborate explanation of his strategic plans and a promise to maintain the bachelor herd as a testing ground for his ongoing theoretical innovations. Tembo's departure followed his characteristic direct approach to life decisions. He announced one morning that he'd identified a promising territorial opportunity and intended to pursue it immediately, without extensive deliberation or complicated farewell ceremonies. His exit strategy involved charging toward his new territory with the same straightforward determination he'd applied to previous challenges. The last you saw of him, he was disappearing over a distant ridge, presumably solving whatever obstacles he encountered through applied momentum and optimistic force. The newer bachelor herd members bring their own personalities and challenges to group management. There's young Kifaru, whose approach to problem-solving involves extensive theoretical analysis followed by cautious experimentation. He reminds you uncomfortably of your own early independence period, when every decision required comprehensive consideration and careful planning. Watching him navigate simple choices about feeding locations or rest timing provides perspective on how exhausting your own decision-making process must have been for more experienced elephants. Then there's Simba, whose name suggests confidence but whose behavior indicates chronic uncertainty about almost everything. He approaches each day as if it's a complex puzzle, requiring careful solution, spending considerable energy analyzing routine activities that more experienced elephants handle automatically. His intellectual approach to basic elephant functions produces entertaining conversations but also requires patient guidance to prevent analysis paralysis from interfering with essential activities like eating and drinking. The guidance responsibility sits uneasily on your shoulders, not because you're unwilling to help, but because you remember your own fumbling approach to independence. The gap between how other elephants perceive your competence and how you remember your actual learning process creates ongoing cognitive dissonance. They see someone who's successfully navigated decades of elephant life and accumulated valuable experience. You remember someone who got stuck in baobab trees and tried to intimidate rhinoceroses. Muth visits you now like a distant, slightly embarrassing relative, showing up uninvited, making everything awkward for a few weeks, then departing and leaving you to deal with the social consequences. You've learned to handle it with as much dignity as possible, though dignity is relative when you're essentially a walking hormone storm for 2 months of the year. The Muth experience transforms from the theoretical concern of your younger years to a practical reality that requires careful management and strategic planning. The hormonal changes affect not just your behavior, but your entire social functioning, temporarily converting you from a diplomatic and reasonable elephant into something resembling a very large, very determined teenager with authority issues. The onset follows predictable patterns that allow for some advanced preparation. The initial hormonal shifts produce subtle changes in mood and perception that serve as early warning signals. You become less interested in group consensus and more focused on individual priorities. Social situations that normally require diplomatic navigation begin to feel like unnecessary complications that could be resolved more efficiently through direct assertion. The physical manifestations include the distinctive temporal gland secretions that announce your condition to other elephants from considerable distances. The scent markers serve as biological broadcasting, informing the local elephant community that you're temporarily operating under different behavioral protocols and should be approached with appropriate caution. Managing muth behavior requires conscious effort to maintain social relationships that will still matter after the hormonal storm passes. The challenge lies in balancing the intense competitive drives that characterize the condition with the long-term relationship maintenance that enables successful community integration. You've learned to implement strategic isolation during peak intensity periods, removing yourself from social situations that might result in conflicts you'll regret once normal judgment returns. The aftermath involves careful relationship repair and social reintegration. Other elephants understand that muth behavior doesn't reflect normal personality characteristics, but some diplomatic work is usually required to restore comfortable social dynamics. The process resembles recovering from an extended illness. Everyone's relieved that you're feeling better, but it takes time to rebuild the easy familiarity that existed before the disruption. Your territory has evolved from places I happen to be to places I deliberately choose to be, which represents significant personal growth. You know every tree, every seasonal stream, every good scratching spot, and every route between them. It's not exactly property ownership in the human sense, but it's your landscape, and you know it better than anyone else. The territorial development process spans multiple decades of gradual exploration, systematic mapping, and careful relationship building with the landscape itself. What began as random wandering during your bachelor years has evolved into comprehensive knowledge of an area covering several hundred square miles, complete with detailed understanding of seasonal variations, resource reliability, and optimal access strategies. The tree inventory alone represents years of accumulated investigation. You know which acacias produce the sweetest pods and when they're likely to drop them. You've identified the baobab trees with the best fruit production and developed efficient harvesting techniques that don't require undignified climbing attempts. The fever trees that provide excellent bark minerals are catalogued by quality and accessibility, with backup options identified for seasons when primary sources become unavailable. Water source knowledge extends beyond simple location identification to include sophisticated understanding of seasonal reliability, quality variations, and social dynamics. Some streams maintain flow through extended dry periods, but require careful timing to avoid conflicts with other large mammals who depend on the same resources. Others provide excellent water during abundant seasons, but fail early during drought periods, requiring alternative planning for dry season survival. The Scratching Tree database reflects both practical necessity and personal preference development. Premium scratching opportunities combine optimal bark texture with convenient positioning and appropriate social privacy. The best trees offer different scratching experiences. Some provide deep grooves perfect for intensive rubbing, others feature textured surfaces ideal for precision spot treatment, and a few offer the sort of comprehensive scratching infrastructure that can occupy an entire afternoon of therapeutic maintenance. Route optimization represents perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of territorial mastery. The landscape contains multiple pathways between any two destinations, but the best routes balance efficiency with safety, resource access with social considerations, and seasonal reliability with tactical flexibility. Primary routes serve everyday travel needs, while backup alternatives provide options when primary paths become unavailable due to seasonal flooding, human activity, or other temporary obstacles. Other elephants respect your claim to certain areas, not because you're particularly aggressive about defending them, but because you've earned the right through years of consistent presence and reasonable behavior. It's authority by consensus rather than conquest, which suits your generally diplomatic approach to life. The territorial respect develops through demonstrated competence and consistent behavior rather than aggressive assertion. Other elephants recognize your expertise in particular areas and defer to your knowledge when they're traveling through regions where you have superior understanding. This deference reflects practical recognition of your value as a resource rather than submission to dominance displays. The consensus-based authority operates through subtle negotiations and mutual accommodation rather than formal territorial boundaries. When other elephants want to access resources within your primary range, the interaction typically involves diplomatic consultation rather than confrontational challenge. You share information about optimal timing, current resource conditions, and potential complications, while they provide intelligence about conditions in their own territorial areas. The system works because everyone benefits from information sharing and conflict avoidance. Territorial disputes require enormous energy expenditure and create ongoing social tensions that interfere with essential activities like feeding and resting. The diplomatic approach allows multiple elephants to utilize the same landscape efficiently while maintaining the social relationships that provide mutual support during challenging periods. The dry seasons have become your specialty. When resources become scarce and decisions need to be made, other elephants defer to your experience. You know which water sources last longest, which routes avoid the worst of human settlement, and how to pace a group for maximum efficiency with minimum drama. The seasonal leadership development reflects decades of accumulated experience with resource scarcity management and group coordination under challenging conditions. Dry seasons test every aspect of elephant survival strategy: water location, nutrition optimization, energy conservation, and social cooperation all become critical factors that determine whether everyone survives to see the next wet season. Your water source expertise represents the foundation of dry season leadership capabilities. Through multiple drought cycles, you've developed encyclopedic knowledge of which sources maintain flow longest, which ones become contaminated during low flow periods, and which alternatives provide backup options when primary sources fail entirely. This knowledge extends beyond simple location identification to include sophisticated understanding of access timing, social protocols, and strategic planning for extended drought periods. The route planning capabilities encompass not just water source navigation, but comprehensive strategy for moving groups efficiently across increasingly challenging landscape conditions. Dry season routes require careful balance between distance minimization and resource optimization, avoiding areas where human activity creates additional complications while maintaining access to the scattered resources that become increasingly precious as drought conditions intensify. Group pacing represents one of the most challenging aspects of seasonal leadership. Different elephants have different physical capabilities, nutritional requirements, and stress tolerance levels. Successful group management requires constant attention to the needs of weaker members while maintaining sufficient progress toward essential resources. The pacing decisions affect not just immediate travel efficiency but long-term group cohesion and individual survival prospects. This responsibility sits oddly on your shoulders, not because you don't welcome it, but because you remember being the elephant who got stuck in baobab trees. Leadership, it turns out, is less about dramatic gestures and more about making a series of small, sensible decisions that add up to everyone arriving alive and reasonably well fed. The leadership role feels surreal when contrasted with your memories of spectacular poor judgment during earlier life stages. The same elephant who once tried to intimidate rhinoceroses and investigate electric fences is now responsible for making decisions that affect the survival of other elephants. The transformation suggests either remarkable personal growth or serious errors in judgment on the part of elephants who've chosen to follow your guidance. The actual practice of leadership involves far more mundane decision-making than heroic gesture-making. Most leadership challenges require choosing between multiple reasonable options rather than identifying obviously correct solutions. The decisions accumulate gradually: which direction to travel when multiple routes seem equally promising, how long to rest when everyone's tired but water sources remain distant, when to push forward despite difficult conditions, and when to wait for better circumstances. The success of these accumulated small decisions depends more on consistent good judgment than occasional brilliant insight. The best leadership decisions tend to be ones that avoid unnecessary risks while maintaining steady progress toward essential goals. Dramatic leadership gestures usually indicate either crisis situations that could have been avoided through better planning or personality issues that interfere with effective group management. The responsibility extends beyond immediate group welfare to include long-term strategic planning and community relationship maintenance. Seasonal leadership requires thinking several seasons ahead, understanding how current decisions will affect future options, and maintaining the social relationships that enable ongoing cooperation and information sharing with other elephant groups. The weight of leadership responsibility manifests not through dramatic burden, but through constant awareness that your decisions affect other elephants' welfare. Every route choice, every timing decision, every resource allocation involves potential consequences for group members who've chosen to trust your judgment. This awareness creates pressure to maintain high standards of decision-making while avoiding the sort of overthinking that leads to paralysis and missed opportunities. The odd comfort in leadership comes from realizing that most elephants remember making their own spectacular mistakes during earlier life stages. The baobab tree incident and rhinoceros intimidation attempt are probably not unique experiences in elephant development. The willingness of other elephants to follow your guidance suggests either that they've made similar mistakes themselves or that they've learned to distinguish between youthful poor judgment and mature decision-making capabilities. The mature years bring the strange satisfaction of having become someone who's trusted with important decisions despite clear evidence of past incompetence. It's not that you've become infallible, it's that you've learned to make better mistakes, to recover from poor decisions more efficiently, and to distinguish between situations that require immediate action and those that benefit from careful consideration. The authority that comes with seasonal leadership operates through demonstrated competence rather than imposed hierarchy. Other elephants follow your guidance because your decisions consistently produce good outcomes, not because they're required to submit to your authority. This consensual leadership creates more pressure to maintain high-performance standards, but also provides the satisfaction of knowing that your contributions are genuinely valued by the community. The responsibility continues to feel slightly surreal, but it's become comfortable in the way that most aspects of mature elephant life settle into familiar patterns. You wake up each day knowing that other elephants will look to you for guidance about seasonal challenges, and you've developed the confidence and competence to provide that guidance reliably. It's not the dramatic leadership you might have imagined during your younger years, but it's effective leadership that serves the practical needs of elephant community survival. The mature years represent the peak of your social and practical capabilities, combining accumulated experience with optimal judgment to produce the sort of reliable competence that elephant communities depend on for survival and prosperity. The authority and responsibility feel earned rather than imposed, developed through decades of gradual learning and consistent contribution to community welfare. The weight of experience continues to accumulate, adding depth and sophistication to your understanding of elephant life, while maintaining the essential curiosity and adaptability that enable continued learning and growth. The mature years aren't an endpoint, but a platform for the next phase of your continuing development as a thoroughly competent, occasionally wise, and generally reliable member of the elephant community. You've reached the age where younger elephants describe you as venerable, which is a polite way of saying old, but still useful. Your tusks are impressive enough to command respect, your knowledge of the landscape is encyclopedic, and your patience for unnecessary drama has reached levels that would impress ancient philosophers. The landscape has changed over the decades, some watering holes have disappeared, new roads have appeared, and the patterns of wet and dry seasons have shifted in ways that keep you constantly recalibrating your expectations. But the essential rhythms remain: eat, walk, rest, repeat, with occasional variations for weather and social obligations. You've become a repository of elephant institutional knowledge, not just where to find water in drought years, but which humans can be trusted, which routes avoid the worst hazards, and how to read the subtle signs that indicate when it's time to move on. Younger elephants seek your advice, though they don't always take it, which is probably for the best. The role of living library suits you surprisingly well. Your memory has become selective in useful ways. You've forgotten most of the embarrassing incidents but retained comprehensive catalogues of practical information. You remember which trees drop fruit during specific moon phases, which human settlements have reasonable elephant policies, and which younger bulls are likely to attempt rhinoceros intimidation, despite clear advice to the contrary. Your physical presence has evolved from impressive to genuinely formidable. The tusks that once seemed unwieldy have become natural extensions of your personality, tools for emphasis during conversations, implements for efficient resource access, and subtle indicators of your accumulated experience. Younger elephants read your tusks like resumes, understanding that ivory of this caliber represents decades of successful survival and resource management. The bachelor herd has become more of a mentorship program than a social club. You find yourself in the position of elder statesman, offering guidance to elephants who remind you uncomfortably of your younger self, full of opinions and short on practical experience. Your teaching style has evolved from direct instruction to strategic positioning. You let them make their own mistakes while ensuring the mistakes aren't fatal ones. It's a delicate balance between wisdom and interference, and you're still learning how to manage it without becoming the sort of elder who's always talking about how things were better in the old days. The mentorship operates through proximity rather than lecture. You position yourself within intervention range when young bulls investigate potentially hazardous situations. You share territory access during their learning phases while letting them develop their own navigation preferences. You offer water source intelligence without dictating travel routes, allowing them to experience both the satisfaction of good decisions and the educational value of poor ones. The satisfaction comes not from being proved right, but from watching capable elephants develop their own expertise. The best students eventually stop asking for advice and start offering their own observations about landscape changes and resource opportunities. They remember your guidance not as rules to follow, but as principles to adapt for their own circumstances. The cycle continues. New young bulls arrive seeking bachelor herd membership, and you find yourself explaining the basics of territorial negotiation and seasonal planning to elephants who could be your great-grandsons. The conversations feel familiar, but each generation brings slight variations that keep the mentorship process interesting rather than repetitive. Your elder years represent the completion of one cycle and the beginning of your contribution to the next. The knowledge accumulated over decades finds its purpose in supporting the development of elephants who will carry similar wisdom into their own future elder years. It's not dramatically exciting, but it's deeply satisfying in the way that most essential elephant activities tend to be practical, reliable, and quietly important to the continuation of elephant civilization. The sun sets on another day in your thoroughly unremarkable but satisfying life. You've survived drought years and abundant ones, navigated the complex social politics of elephant society, and somehow become the sort of elephant others look to for guidance. It's not the life you might have imagined when you were a confused calf stumbling around the savannah, but it's yours. The evening ritual unfolds with the sort of comfortable predictability that comes with decades of practice. You assess the day's accomplishments: water consumed, vegetation processed, social obligations met with appropriate diplomacy. It's been a good day by elephant standards, which means nothing dramatic happened, no serious conflicts arose, and everyone you encountered remained adequately fed and reasonably content with their circumstances. The transformation from stumbling calf to respected elder still feels improbable when you consider the evidence of your early incompetence. The elephant who once got stuck in baobab trees and tried to intimidate rhinoceroses somehow evolved into someone whose opinion about seasonal timing carries weight with experienced bulls. The process happens so gradually that you barely notice the accumulation of competence and authority. Your tusks catch the last light of the setting sun, casting shadows that remind you of the decades they represent. Each ring in their ivory structure tells the story of another year survived, another seasonal cycle navigated, another collection of small decisions that somehow added up to a successful elephant life. They're not the most impressive tusks in the region, but they're yours, and they've served their purpose reliably for decades of practical application. Tomorrow will bring more of the same eating, walking, the occasional social obligation, and the ongoing project of simply being an elephant in a world that has strong opinions about what elephants should be doing. You'll wake up, assess the weather and the state of your various joints, and make the daily decision to continue being large, grey, and generally unflappable. The predictability provides comfort rather than boredom. Each day offers variations on familiar themes: which water source to visit, which trees deserve investigation, which other elephants might benefit from casual consultation about territorial matters. The routine contains enough flexibility to remain interesting while providing the sort of structural reliability that makes long-term planning possible. Your joint assessment has become part of the morning ritual, an inventory of mechanical systems that have been operating continuously for several decades. Some joints protest more than others, requiring strategic warm-up procedures and careful pacing throughout the day. The maintenance requirements increase gradually, but the core systems remain remarkably functional for equipment that's been in service as long as yours has. The decision to continue being an elephant might seem automatic, but it represents a daily choice to engage with the world rather than withdrawing into comfortable solitude. Being large, grey, and unflappable requires ongoing effort to maintain the social relationships and territorial knowledge that make elephant life possible. The alternative, becoming a grumpy hermit who avoids all social interaction, holds occasional appeal but lacks the satisfactions that come from community engagement. The landscape stretches out around you, familiar and ever-changing. Somewhere in the distance, younger elephants are probably getting themselves into the sort of trouble you've learned to avoid, and older elephants are shaking their heads at the foolishness of youth. The cycle continues, slow and steady, like everything else in elephant life. The familiar territory contains decades of accumulated memories layered over each other, like sedimentary deposits. Every tree holds associations with past encounters. Every water source connects to stories of seasonal challenges overcome. Every trail represents routes developed through years of gradual optimization. The landscape serves as an external memory bank that reinforces your sense of place and continuity. The generational cycling provides both entertainment and reassurance. Watching young bulls attempt to reinvent basic elephant techniques reminds you that some lessons can only be learned through direct experience, regardless of how much guidance is offered. Their inevitable mistakes provide educational opportunities, while confirming that your own early incompetence wasn't unique to your particular development process. The older elephants who preceded you in this role continue to offer occasional guidance through subtle modeling of elder behavior. They demonstrate that aging can be accomplished with dignity and continued contribution to community welfare. Their patient tolerance of younger elephants' enthusiasm suggests that the cycle of mentorship extends indefinitely backward and forward through elephant generations. You settle into your favorite sleeping spot, a patch of ground you've been using for 15 years, worn smooth by your considerable bulk. The stars appear overhead, the same constellations that have watched over elephants for millennia. Tomorrow will be another day of the boring, unremarkable, thoroughly satisfying life of an elephant.